December 6, 1941, 10:15 p.m., Downing Street, London. London's streets are wrapped in blackout curtains. Not a single light leaks through the sandbagged windows. The sound of distant anti-aircraft guns echoes against the winter fog, a grim lullaby that every Londoner has learned to live with. In a narrow office on the second floor of number 10, Prime Minister Winston Churchill stands over a flickering desk lamp, a half-smoked cigar trembling in his fingers. His eyes trace a line of coded text printed on thin yellow paper, a telegram from Washington. The cipher clerk has just left, closing the door softly behind him. The silence is heavy, almost suffocating. You can almost hear the heartbeat in the room. Across the Atlantic, it's still daylight in Hawaii. Churchill adjusts his glasses, reading the final line again. Unusual Japanese naval movement. Pacific communication silent. Possible imminent action. He exhales slowly, his breath fogging the small patch of window, not yet frosted by December chill. For weeks, British intelligence analysts at Bletchley Park have been intercepting fragments of Japanese communications, encrypted messages in the diplomatic purple code they'd warned of possible aggression. Still, no one could pinpoint where. A humble manila folder sits at the edge of his desk, stamped Most Secret. Inside are reports from Commander Travis and Alan Turing's colleagues, noting that Japanese consular cables from Washington to Tokyo had grown bizarrely coded and urgent. Words like deadline and burn after reading appear more often. Churchill knows what that means. He's seen it before. Warsaw, Oslo, Dunkirk. Storms gather quietly before they strike. But Britain's grip on survival is fragile. Every fleet, every convoy, every spike of radar matters to keep the island breathing. The United States, however, the great arsenal of democracy, has stayed neutral despite Roosevelt's sympathies. Churchill needs America. He needs them not just as suppliers, but as fighters. Still, a thought flickers across his mind, dark and dangerous. If Japan strikes the United States, Washington will have no choice but to enter the war. The cigar roll between his lips pauses. The hum of the war room below is muffled, like a storm behind walls. He knows the political consequences, the moral weight. But this war has already erased the lines between right and wrong. Outside, Big Ben tolls midnight. Across 7,000 miles of ocean, Japanese carrier groups slice through the black waters north of Oahu, undetected. On board the Akagi, Admiral Kiichi Nagumo studies flight maps in the glow of a red lantern. 6 carriers, 353 aircraft. The order is already written. Climb Mount Niitaka. The signal to strike. Back in London, Churchill leans back in his chair, rubbing his temples. A gambler's instinct tells him something is about to snap. Yet despite repeated warnings from British naval intelligence, codenamed Hydra reports, he has not lifted the phone to call Roosevelt that night, not to warn, not to ask. History will forever question why. Was it oversight or calculation? He glances once more at the telegram, folds it sharply, and drops it into his burn box. The embers swallow the paper whole, reflected in his weary eyes. Midnight fades into silence. By morning, the world will be on fire, but tonight Winston Churchill sleeps. The city never truly sleeps. Even through the blackout gloom, the rumble of war-distant air raid sirens, the clatter of military convoys, rolls through London like thunder beneath the earth. In the early hours, when guards switch posts and teleprinters hum in government basements, a quiet unease hangs in the air, unspoken but palpable. Inside the cabinet war rooms, a faint light cuts through the stale tobacco mist. Churchill stands before the great wall map. Pins, strings, and flags spread like veins across the Pacific. Beneath it, naval officers whisper, their voices low, guarded, the way men speak when they sense something irreversible approaching. "Sir, One of them begins carefully. The reports from Intercept Station Hong Kong confirm. The Japanese convoys are moving east. Fast. Churchill doesn't turn. And the Americans? Have they been informed? A pause. Yes, Prime Minister, replies Commander Ismay. Our liaison officers have cabled the information through Washington channels, but there's been ... no reply. Not yet. Churchill nods slowly, eyes narrowing. Not yet, he mutters under his breath, as if time itself had become his adversary. He walks toward the map and taps his finger lightly against the small outline of Hawaii. An unremarkable speck to most, but to him and to every strategist alive, it's the hinge of the Pacific, the gateway to America's western defense. He exhales through his nose, heavily. There's a difference between knowing danger and believing it. Washington still treats this as intelligence chatter, not an imminent strike. And yet, the Japanese do nothing idly. Outside, another air raid drills the capital. Somewhere above London's clouded sky, a squadron of RAF fighters intercepts enemy bombers, throwing volleys of tracer fire into the fog like orange comets. War feels close again, Hungary. In that claustrophobic underground room, Churchill's thoughts drift across the ocean toward Roosevelt. He can almost hear the man's voice, calm, burdened, elusive. The president walks a tightrope strung between public opinion and moral duty. The American people want no part of another European slaughter. But Roosevelt knows, just as Churchill does, that isolationism cannot hold forever. And now, fate seems to be steering events faster than diplomacy. Suddenly, footsteps echo from the corridor. A telegram runner bursts through the heavy door, breathless and shaking slightly from the cold. Message from Bletchley Park, sir, he stammers, handing the slip forward. Churchill takes it. His eyes dart over the printed code groups, then settle on the final decrypted line, another signal between Tokyo and its embassy in Washington. Complete your tasks. Destroy all codebooks. Relations will be terminated. The Prime Minister stares at the words, his jaw tightening. So it comes. He can taste the inevitability, metallic, bitter, like blood. He knows the Japanese do not send polite warnings before they strike. Nations do not burn their codes unless preparing for war. Get this relayed to our naval attache in Washington, he orders, and alert the Admiralty. Every vessel in the Pacific must be on watch. There's hesitation in the room. Several eyes flick toward one another, carefully, uncertainly, but no one speaks. They've seen their leader act on instinct before, and those instincts are rarely wrong. Yet despite everything, the broken codes, the intercepted transmissions, the mounting warnings, no official word passes from Downing Street to the White House, not directly. Not this night. Maybe he believes Roosevelt already knows. Maybe he cannot afford another accusation of manipulating American opinion. Or maybe, deep in the recesses of Churchill's battle-bruised mind, there's the faint, forbidden hope that if the inevitable comes, it might bring America with it. He sets his jaw, gives a small nod to Ismay, and turns toward the war room phones. Keep watch, he mutters. Until dawn. Hours crawl by. Cigars turn to ash. The hum of machines and the scratching of pencils fill the silence like insects in the dark. And then, somewhere along the transatlantic cables, the signal passes, a simple note from the U.S. Navy's radar outpost in Oahu, large formation approaching from the north. Possible aircraft formation. It is barely acknowledged. The message, lost in bureaucracy, in doubt, in moments squandered. And Churchill, oceans away, finally sets down his pen, unaware that at that very instant, 100 Japanese pilots are strapping into their cockpits, engines roaring in the pre-dawn stillness of the Pacific. The first light of dawn brushes across Oahu's mountains, staining the sea with streaks of gold. It's a peaceful morning, deceptively so. Palm leaves sway softly in the humid breeze. and the air smells faintly of salt and rain. At Ford Island, sailors stretch lazily beside anchored ships, unaware that they stand on the edge of history. A lone seagull drifts through the calm sky, circling above the gray hull of the USS Arizona. Below, two sailors, Jack Evans and Tom Harris, share a cigarette and a joke about home. The air is still light, the world still intact. Then, from the horizon, comes a new sound, faint, low, building. At first, it's mistaken for thunder, but it isn't thunder. Engines. Dozens of them. Jack squints toward the clouds. You hear that? Tom nods, stepping out from under the awning. Probably a training run from Hickam Field. His voice trails off. A dark formation is slicing through the morning haze. Planes, diving lower, sunlight glinting off their wings. And then the first bombs fall. The sky erupts. Flames bloom across the harbor as shockwaves roll over the ships. Metal screams. The Arizona takes a direct hit, its deck splitting open with a roar that drowns out every human voice. Fireballs leap into the air, painting the clouds crimson. Within minutes, the calm blue of Pearl Harbor turns black. Back in London, the radio crackles with chaos. Churchill, seated at his desk again, looks up as his secretary bursts in. Prime Minister urgent cable from Washington, she gasps. He takes it with shaking hands. Only a few words. Only what matters. Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor. For a moment, Churchill doesn't move. The world seems to stop moving around him. The ticking of the clock, the faint vibrations of the underground generators, all fading into silence. Then he closes his eyes, exhaling deeply. It has happened. The very moment he both dreaded and perhaps needed. He doesn't see relief as victory. Rather, it's the grim inevitability realized. In his war-hardened mind, the map begins to change. He sees alliances shifting like tectonic plates. Where hours ago Britain stood almost alone, now it has a partner awakened by fire. Across the Atlantic, Roosevelt sits silently in his study, the telegram trembling slightly in his hand. He grips his cane, his knuckles white. So, he murmurs. The sleeping giant stirs. The words never reach Churchill, but when their eyes meet days later in the halls of history, they won't need to be spoken. Back inside number 10, the Prime Minister rises slowly from his chair. We are all in the same boat now, he says finally. The sentence hangs heavy in the air, stripped of triumph, filled only with the weary gravity of a man who's seen too much of war. The War Cabinet scrambles into the map room. Voices rise, reports spill in, Morse operators rattle out transmissions. The tension is electric, unforgiving. Churchill lights a new cigar and watches the smoke coil upward like ghosts over the Atlantic. He knows what people will ask, tomorrow, and for decades to come. Did he know it was coming? Did he ignore the warnings? And though history will never decide the answer cleanly, Churchill himself feels the weight of silence pressing on his conscience. He turns toward the maps again, Europe bleeding red, the Pacific ablaze, the old world collapsing into the fire of the new. And still, behind his weary eyes, something moves, resolve, cold and sharp. Because while America now faces war, Britain finally has what it needed most. Not just weapons, not just chips, but hope. And hope, Churchill knows, is as dangerous as any bomb when held by those who refuse to surrender. Still, even as night falls again over London, one question refuses to fade. A whisper in the back of his mind he'll never entirely silence. What if I could have stopped it? Because sometimes victory feels like tragedy wearing a different uniform. Smoke still lingers over Hawaii's shattered harbor as the news ripples outward, a tidal wave of disbelief stretching from the Pacific to the Atlantic. In Washington, the shock is immediate. In London, it is quietly seismic. By the time word echoes through the War Cabinet, Churchill has already locked himself away in his private quarters. The lamps burn low. Maps and documents lie scattered across the table, crumpled by restless hands. The cigar between his fingers has long gone out. He sits in stillness, every breath heavy with the knowledge that the course of the war, and perhaps civilization itself, has just changed forever. Across the ocean, in a small radio room deep beneath the Admiralty, signals officers record transmission after transmission from American stations. The words are raw, frantic, and painful. Battleships burning, casualties heavy, total surprise. Each message punctures the air like a heartbeat skipping inside a chest. The men transcribing them glance at each other silently. No one speaks of blame, only disbelief. Churchill finally rises, his back stiff, his expression unreadable. He walks toward the narrow window, hands clasped behind him. The city outside is quiet under blackout, peaceful in appearance, but beneath that stillness, he feels an eerie alignment, as though the entire planet has turned its face toward war at the same instant. His phone rings. It's not a military aide this time, but a familiar voice crackling through static. "Winston," says Roosevelt, subdued but steady. "The attack is confirmed." There's a long silence. Then Churchill replies, softly, "Then we are together at last." What he doesn't say, what he can't say, is that this unity was purchased with shock and blood. He lowers his tone, steady and grave, offering sympathy, solidarity, even comfort. But in his chest, two conflicting emotions wage their own private battle. Sorrow for America's wound, and a grim, almost resigned relief that Britain is no longer bleeding alone. When the call ends, Churchill stands for a moment, staring into nothing. Then he reaches for his notes and begins dictating orders. Inform the fleet. Immediate coordination with United States commands. Issue a statement to the public by dawn. His voice regains its familiar iron, though the weight behind it is heavier than ever. Outside, the city prepares for morning, unaware of the transformation that has already taken place. For the first time since the war began, there is a whisper of hope among London soldiers, seamen, and civilians, a sense that the burden might soon be shared. Mothers in queue lines murmur that perhaps now the end will come closer, that perhaps now, with America awake, the tide will change. But inside number 10, Churchill feels something colder settle over him. The realization that victory will no longer be counted in months or even years, but in generations scarred and continents reshaped. The reports from Bletchley come in one by one. Decoded fragments of pre-attack messages, the diplomatic chatter that hinted at Japan's intentions. Churchill reads them in silence, lines of prophecy written too late. Every page a quiet accusation. The analysts' warnings, the decrypted telegrams, the missed opportunity to sound the alarm, all laid bare. He sets them down carefully and whispers to himself, "History will not forgive misunderstanding." But history rarely cares for fairness. In the corridors below, the sound of typewriters resumes, the machinery of war grinding into motion once more. Above ground, dawn's pale light creeps through the edges of the blackout curtains. The night has ended, but not in peace. Churchill turns to his aide. "Prepare my speech," he says. "By the time I address Parliament, the world must know Britain stands with America." The aide nods, clutching his notepad, waiting. Churchill does not dictate the speech immediately. Instead, he pauses, gazing at the fireplace where last night's telegram still smolders in the grate. For a fleeting moment, the flames reflect in his eyes like old ghosts. He exhales deeply, his voice barely above a whisper. This will be the end of them, or of us. Yet even as the words fade, a faint sound rises above the city, the murmur of radio broadcasts beginning to spread the news. The world has changed overnight, though few yet grasp how completely. And while London wakes to a new chapter, Churchill straightens his jacket, ready to play his next move in the most dangerous game Earth has ever seen. By mid-morning, the fog over London begins to lift, and with it comes the hum of life returning to the streets. Boots on pavement, the distant clatter of trams, and somewhere a crackling radio relaying Roosevelt's voice to the world. Inside the war rooms, every head turns toward the small receiver placed in the corner of the map room as the president's words arrive across the Atlantic, solemn, deliberate, immortal, a date which will live in infamy. Churchill closes his eyes as he listens. The words aren't his, but they strike him with the same moral force he's carried for 2 grinding years. The measured cadence, the restrained fury. It is not the speech of a man shocked into war, but of one awakening to it. When Roosevelt declares that America will fight on land, sea, and air, Churchill knows the balance of the world has shifted. He leans forward slightly in his chair. For the first time in months, there's color in his face. He understands, Churchill murmurs under his breath. He truly understands. Around the table, ministers exchange looks. They've seen the Prime Minister weary, defiant, nearly broken. But not like this. There's an almost fierce light in his eyes. "Gentlemen," he says, standing, "the United States are now at war with Japan, and soon enough with the rest of our enemies. The cause of democracy, of civilization itself, has new breath." Yet amid this fierce resolve, the ghosts of the past hours still linger in his mind. Telegrams unread, warnings misunderstood, choices made in silence. As the meeting disperses, Churchill lingers behind, staring at the Pacific section of the map once more. The red pins marking Japanese fleets have spread wide, swallowing islands one after another. Admiral Pound steps beside him. "They caught the Americans by complete surprise, sir. Their fleet took a blow that'll take years to recover." Churchill's jaw tenses. "And yet," he says quietly, "they will recover. They are a giant, Alfred. Wounded? Yes, but now fully awake. Hitler has sealed his fate without knowing it." Outside, reporters gather at Whitehall, their breath-forming clouds in the winter air as they wait for the official statement. Behind them, Londoners clutch newspapers printed with a headline that feels both tragic and transforming. "Japan strikes, America enters war." The crowd is silent at first, staring at the bold black letters. Then, quietly, someone whispers, "We're not alone anymore." The line spreads like fire through the mass of people who've endured bombings, evacuations, and endless nights in shelters. Seats of fear replace just a little with the fragile thrill of hope. Through the iron door of the war rooms, an aide enters briskly with a fresh report. Intercepted diplomatic chatter from Berlin. Little more than fragments, coded and incomplete. But one message is crystal clear. Germany plans to declare war on the United States. Churchill takes the paper and stares at it, reading it twice, then once more for certainty. A grim smile tugs at the corner of his mouth. "Then it's done," he murmurs, voice quiet but sharp as steel. "Hitler will invite his own executioner into the fight." He walks toward the operations board and places the fresh sheet on the table. "From this moment," he tells his staff, "we move as one alliance. Every shipment, every convoy, every piece of sea and air coordination must reflect that. Britain will fight beside America, and together we will end this plague that's devoured the world." His words spread quickly through the room, galvanizing the officers who, for so long, have fought with rationed planes and borrowed time. America's entry means production, manpower, and industry on a scale Europe cannot match. But it also means new responsibility and new scrutiny. In the privacy of his bunker, as the staff disperses, Churchill sits once more in solitude. The cigar rests unlit in his hand. He allows himself only a moment's reflection, staring into the faint glow of the dying fireplace. There are victories that taste of ashes, and this is one of them. For all his confidence that this will bring salvation to Britain, the question still gnaws at him. Could Pearl Harbor have been prevented if the Allies had spoken clearer, sooner? The documents on his desk say otherwise. The Japanese war machine was in motion long before the final telegrams crossed the sea. But doubt is insidious. It seeps in between the cracks of every decision made in darkness. He rises, turning toward the mirror hung near the door. His reflection stares back at him, the tired eyes, the lines carved deep from sleepless years. History, he mutters to himself, will ask why we didn't see soon enough, and I shall have to answer that I did see. I just couldn't speak. Above ground, the radio continues to blare Roosevelt's defiant promise that the American people will gain the inevitable triumph. A promise born on the shock of fire and steel, bought with lives lost in the waters of the Pacific. Churchill turns off the radio and whispers into the sudden quiet. Then let it begin. The corridors of power hum with new purpose. In the days following Pearl Harbor, Downing Street feels less like a wartime bunker and more like a nerve center for global strategy. Telegraph machines clatter without pause. Pages of coded messages pile up faster than they can be read, and the once quiet rooms echo with footsteps at all hours. Churchill moves through it all with restless energy, cigar smoke trailing behind him like a signal flare in dim air. He is a man half driven by vision, half haunted by memory. Every conversation begins the same way now. The coordination of fleets, the merging of command, the logistics of survival. But in the rare moments when the room falls silent, he feels a faint whisper somewhere within himself. You knew pieces of the storm before it came. Bletchley Park confirms more decrypts from Magic, the American code breaking system now being linked with British intelligence. The analysts are brilliant, tireless, but even brilliance has guilt. One young cryptographer, his voice trembling, hands Churchill a folder. Prime Minister, this communication was intercepted 3 days before the attack. Inside, neat lines of decrypted Japanese text reveal instructions to suspend diplomatic discussions. Words of closure. And an eerie precision of timing. Churchill closes the folder slowly. The air thickens. He can feel the eyes of everyone in the room. They want some word, some verdict. Instead, he says only, war does not wait for clarity. It devours hesitation. Then, softer, almost to himself, history is a cruel listener. He dismisses them and sinks into his chair. Through the reinforced wall comes the distant hum of city life. Buses, footsteps, the chatter of civilians who still clutch ration books and half believe the worst is behind them. But above it all rides a new tone. Confidence, vigor, a nation that suddenly feels it has all eyes again. In the map room, naval markers begin to shift westward, American ships now coordinating with the Royal Navy to form Atlantic convoys. Naval officers murmur about resources flowing like lifeblood from factories in Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh. The combined strength feels unstoppable on paper. Yet Churchill knows wars are not fought on charts. They are fought in minds, where doubt and pride are even deadlier than bullets. Late that night, he receives a confidential envelope marked Eyes Only. It is from Lord Halifax, Britain's ambassador to Washington. The letter inside is cautious, almost apologetic. Roosevelt, it says, is under scrutiny. Isolationists claim his government concealed intelligence. Congress is inflamed. Hearings are inevitable. Churchill reads to the end, then folds the paper without a word. Across the table, his military secretary studies his face, unsure whether what flickers there is anger, amusement, or both. Sir, the man says carefully, if they ask, shall we disclose what we knew? Churchill leans back, eyes narrowing. Disclose? Disclose? No, my dear boy, we shall remember. There is a difference. He stands, pacing slowly beneath the dimmed ceiling lights. The Americans deserve unity, not doubt. The moment they begin to suspect one another, the enemy gains ground without firing a shot. He turns sharply. There will be no whisper from London suggesting we foresaw what befell them. Not one. The aide nods, writing nothing down. These are words meant only for the air. For a long stretch, Churchill studies the wall map again. He traces a finger from London to Washington, and to the vast Pacific dotted with flames of conflict. Singapore, Manila, Wake Island. Every inch of blue water now feels alive with consequence. At last he extinguishes his cigar, speaking softly to no one in particular. The attack was a horror. Yet without it, democracy might have slept too long. He closes the room and climbs the narrow stairs to the surface. Outside, London's sky glows with faint orange from distant fires, the remnants of another German night raid. The Prime Minister draws in the cold air sharply, tilts his head upward and murmurs, "The storm has crossed the ocean, and we shall guide it together." Behind him, the distant bells of Westminster begin to strike midnight. The next phase of the war has begun, an era when empires will crumble, alliances will harden, and men will learn what it costs to be right too late. Months pass, and the rhythm of war reshapes the world. Winter fades into a spring that feels colder than any before. The flags in front of Whitehall flutter under gun-metal skies. Bombed-out buildings still stand like broken teeth. Yet beneath the cracks, the machinery of alliance roars to life. British and American officers now share the same war rooms, the same cigars, the same sense of urgency. The Atlantic convoys grow thicker each week, destroyers guarding merchant ships, aircraft carriers shadowed by U-boats. Across the vast waters of the Pacific, the U.S. Navy claws its way back, island by island. Churchill receives nightly dispatches from everywhere: the Middle East, the Russian front, the South Pacific. Each telegram is a mixture of triumph and tragedy. A victory here, a defeat there, all of it forming a symphony of exhaustion. He spends long hours reading them beside the fireplace, his cane leaning against the heavy chair he rarely leaves until dawn. One night, as rain lashes the dark windows of number 10, he receives a cable that stills his hand before it reaches for the next page. It's from General Eisenhower, newly commanding Allied operations in North Africa. The message is brief but decisive. A turning point. Enemy forces in retreat. The Allies advance. He sits back. The war isn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, victory no longer feels like a fantasy cast against despair. The tide that turned on that December morning in Hawaii continues to rise, carried by every uniform that stands under one banner. Still, when the room empties, the specter of doubt remains. The folders labeled pre-attack intelligence lie locked in a cabinet, untouched since the night after Pearl Harbor. Sometimes, when no one's watching, Churchill opens them, perhaps to punish himself, perhaps to remember. One page bears the handwriting of a young code officer. Possible Japanese plans against American interests. Level of urgency, high. He runs a thumb slowly across the ink. The words are harmless now, evidence of warnings the world hadn't wanted to hear. He closes the folder like closing a wound and whispers into the quiet. In the end, it was not knowledge that failed us. It was belief. The thought stays with him long after he turns off the lamp. For all the glory of new alliances and gathered strength, he knows history's harsh truth, that every victory carries the shape of what was lost to reach it. Years later, as peace finally returns and an aged Churchill walks through the ruins of what was once a divided continent, he pauses before a crowd in Westminster. Reporters wait for one last statement, notebooks ready. He smiles faintly, the same weathered face that had stared down fire and guilt alike. They will debate, he says, whether warnings were ignored and whether fate could have been averted. But history is not a courtroom. It is a mirror, and it shows us not what we meant to do, but who we became when we did it. The crowd is silent. Somewhere beyond them, Big Ben chimes again, steady, eternal. He lifts his cigar to his lips, the flame trembling faintly against the evening wind. America was roused by tragedy, he continues, eyes distant, voice softer now. And in that awakening, the free world found its will to live. He lets the words hang in the cool twilight, then turns away, the man who carried more secrets than triumphs, more burdens than medals, and steps into the quiet corridor leading home. Outside, the last light of day glows on the Thames, reflecting a sky no longer lit by war. And somewhere within its rippling surface, a truth endures. History seldom remembers what might have been, only what men dared to do when the darkness came.